Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Roop Rai, and you're watching TC San. In party elections like the provincial and the federal elections, candidates run on a party's platform. But in city elections, you have the freedom to create and run on your own platform, and that works better for some political aspirants. My guest today is Nate Pike, who is a candidate for councillor for Ward 3 in Calgary, and he tells us his why behind him running to be a councillor. Let's please welcome Nate Pike. Hi, Nate.
Hi, Roop. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to me today.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
So it is election season in Calgary, especially in Calgary, because we have municipal elections coming up, and we may have federal elections coming up too. And there are candidates coming out of the woodwork, especially in our ward, which is Ward 3, which is where I live too. There are candidates putting their names forward across the city right now, and which is great for the democratic process. But I'm curious to know what makes one put their name forth to run an election. So what is your motivation to run for councillor?
There's a bunch for me, quite honestly. The biggest one is probably there were several people who asked me to consider it, and I'm a big believer that when somebody asks you to step up to do a thing, you take it seriously. Another big part of it for me is I've been watching the way that I mean, politics in general, but politics at the municipal level as well has gotten more and more polarized. It's gotten more and more, the word I would use would be theatrical, where people are, it seems like a lot of elected officials are more concerned with how can they take whatever issue is in front of them and turn it into something that they can use for something that says, look at me. And I don't know that that's necessarily in the best interests of constituents of the electorate, because if the focus of an elected official is constantly, how can I get the most airtime for myself, that heavily suggests that they're not really fully applying themselves to dealing with the issues that their constituents are wanting them to. So I'm just quite frankly tired of people not being able to trust their elected officials. I'm tired of politicians who put on a really, really good show, but they don't actually talk about what the issues actually are, and they don't earn the trust of the electorate, which I think should be their number one priority. So that's the other thing that I'm trying to do. I want to see if somebody who is committed to telling the truth as best they can get elected, and we're going to find out.
So last time we interacted, you were running for MLA in Calgary Northeast, and now you've made the transition from the party politics to city politics. Why this transition? Why did you not just stick around for the next provincial politics? Because obviously the next one is going to be up for grabs, literally, the way things are going right now in the province.
It certainly seems like it's going to be a hotly contested provincial election. But for me, fundamentally, what it boils down to is party politics is not really the best fit for Nate, I don't think. One of the things that I'm a big believer in is that if you're going to run to represent an area, your first responsibility has to be to represent that area. And one of the things that happens with party politics, as I'm sure you're aware, is the focus shifts from representing the constituents to representing the party. And to me, that's a very dangerous road to go down, because it forces, it creates a bunch of different feedback loops. The biggest one probably is parties tend to look for people who will do what they're told, which by extension means that those people are not going to be effectively advocating for their constituents, which means their constituents see that and they start to lose trust in the institutions of government. And here we are. I don't really want to be a part of that. And I'm not really wired in a way. I don't do well when somebody says, this is what you have to say, regardless of what you believe. That's just not how I'm wired. If I want to say a thing because I believe a thing, I'm going to say the thing. And the nice thing about municipal politics is that, with the exception of some of the slates that we're seeing running, people are allowed and expected to speak their minds and represent their constituents first. So that's kind of what brought the shift for me.
You mentioned slates that you're seeing in these municipal elections. Can you talk about them?
Sure. There's several. I mean, we're seeing lots of outright slates. There's certain organizations that are putting the organization's been in place for quite some time, and they're putting candidates across the city. And there's also sort of the quieter slates where people are aligning with a whole set of candidates across the city for whatever reason. I find those things to be extremely problematic, because when it's a cheap way of bringing party politics to the municipal level where there isn't supposed to be party politics. And the other thing that really concerns me about it is when you have a group of people that are campaigning together as part of an organization, whether it's a explicit or implied organization, favors are collected. If I'm going to lend you a bunch of volunteers or whatever the case may be, there's at the very least, there's a bit of a perceived debt. And that to me is really problematic because, again, I go back to the fact that elected officials should be representing their constituents first. And if there's all of these backroom debts that are owed, or worse, if there's an actual organization that's running a slate of candidates, which we saw in the last election as well, then the lines start to really get blurred as to who are these people actually working to support. And I don't think that's what Calgarians deserve, and I certainly don't think it's what the people of Ward 3 deserve. One of the biggest problems that Ward 3 has had on an ongoing basis, certainly for almost as long as I've lived here, is there's been a real frustration that people have about not having a voice at City Hall. I mean, Jeremy Clausis, who's the editor of The Sprawl, made a joke a while back about how you could do anything in the North and nobody would say anything. And I think people are tired of that. And I'm more than happy to try to be a voice that will say something and that will stand up for constituents and not worry about, do I need to dance with the one that brung me?
Jody Gondik, who has been the councillor for Ward 3 for the last 4 years now, she's been a strong voice and she has been a strong advocate for Green Line. And there have been conversations around school. We're getting a high school in our ward now too, although that is provincial. But those were the two hot topics that were often discussed in the political circles in Ward 3. But what do you see as the biggest issues now in Ward 3, other than those two?
I think there's a bunch. I think obviously the Green Line, and regarding the high school, I just think it's important to state, well, there's no question that Jody, as well as several other elected officials, advocated strongly for the school. I think it's really important to be clear that I believe the biggest reason why we have the school is because of the volunteer efforts that a bunch of grassroots community members did and persisted with over multiple terms of multiple different elected officials. If we didn't have them, we wouldn't have the high school. So I get a little squirrely when anybody who's elected gets the credit for that, because it really was the work of the grassroots volunteers. But in regards to the issues, I think there's a bunch. I mean, the Green Line's a big one. The economic recovery post-COVID is huge. There's no question about that, because not only is Calgary dealing with the economic reality of COVID and the impact that it's had, but we're also dealing with an economic downturn, and we're dealing with a paradigm shift in regards to how Calgary is going to function in the world economy. And I think that that's a big challenge and a big concern. The number of people that I've talked to over the last 6 months, and even dating back farther than that to my provincial campaign, who are looking at leaving Calgary because they just don't see any opportunity here anymore, is heartbreaking. And I don't want to see that. I think I've lived in Calgary for 3 decades and change now. And I think that Calgary is an incredible place that has a lot of opportunity. It has the potential to be a world leader in a variety of sectors. And I think that we need to make sure that we're doing that. But quite frankly, I think the biggest issue that we have is the fundamental distrust in government. We take a look even at the arena deal, which was supposed to be signed and sealed and delivered, and there were all of these great steps. And just recently, one of the partners in the arena deal said, well, actually, we'd like $70 million more and a bunch more land, and we don't want the city to be part of the group that's overseeing the construction of the arena. And we also want to be able to control traffic in the area. That to me is symptomatic of a deal that should have never been signed. I had problems with the financial structure of that deal to begin with, but that to me, the fact that that's even a possibility to happen, that's symptomatic of a deal that should have never been signed and certainly shouldn't have been voted through council if it was so weak that we're in the situation that we are now. Because fundamentally, I do think that having an event center in Calgary is important. Again, I'm not a big fan of the original financial structure, but because that deal was clearly handled so poorly, now that work is on pause. And that work being on pause means that there's a bunch of Calgarians who are going to be going to work who can't anymore. And this is the worst possible time for something like that to happen. So the biggest issue, I think, to sort of work my way all the way back to the beginning of your question, the biggest issue is the economy. We have to get people back to work. We have to get the economy restarted. And we also have to recognize with that there's a paradigm shift, and we have to embrace that, not run from it.
I think that's an issue applicable to everyone in Canada right now.
Yep.
Unfortunately, hopefully things will get better. So those of you who are watching have not got your vaccines yet, please check your local pharmacies. Yes. If you can get your vaccine, go get your vaccine. We need herd immunity for all of us to get out of this. Yep. All right. So you said that you lived in Calgary for 3 decades. How many years out of those 3 decades have you lived in Ward 3? And why is it important for you to have a local candidate running in, whether it's a provincial or federal or municipal elections? Because I've heard you say that. I've heard you always talk about you being local here in Coventry or in Ward 3 or earlier in Calgary Northeast. So why was that important for you, and how long have you lived here?
I've lived in Ward 3 in Coventry for 12 years now. I moved into the north end of Coventry when it was still being built. Prior to that, I lived in Dalhousie and Edgemont, and I spent a little bit of time, a good chunk of time actually, living in the core downtown in Kensington area. So I moved to Calgary when I was 10. I'm a lot older than 10 now. I turned 45 this year. So it's been a while. In regards to why I think that having a local candidate is so critically important, if somebody's local and they're engaged in their community, they already know what the issues are and they can hit the ground running. They already have the relationships built with the people who are in the community, so they can use those resources to make sure that things get moving quickly. One of the challenges that I think that we have, well, it's twofold, really. If you have somebody who hasn't been an active member of the community, then what ends up happening is they spend the first chunk of time going like, oh, so what's going on? And then they have to build the relationships with the people who are involved. And that just causes a delay. But fundamentally, I think the biggest thing for me is I live here. I'm raising my kids here. I actually work here. So my job as a paramedic, I spend the vast majority of my time specifically working. I'm fortunate enough to be specifically working in Ward 3. I have a stake in how well.
And you volunteer here as well.
Yep.
You've been volunteering for many years.
Yeah,
as long as I've known you.
Yeah, I've been on the board for the NHCA. I've done all kinds of different fundraisers. I've done volunteer work with a bunch of different organizations. So I fundamentally, I think that people who have a stake in what's going on in the community and aren't just doing it for performative reasons, they're going to do more work. They're going to be more passionate about the work. And I think also, and this is an important one for me, with those existing relationships within the community, or at least the start of them, they're going to be able to be more accessible, and they're also going to be able to access the community better. I mean, one of the big frustrations that we hear about City Hall all the time is the fact that people don't feel like they're being listened to. And I think part of that comes from the fact that we have people who don't necessarily want to put the time and energy into listening because I got to figure out how to make this issue about me, not my constituents, which is garbage to me. But it's also the fact that there's the pathways aren't readily available for people to talk and for elected officials to listen. And I think that especially in the time of COVID, being available to listen and not being distracted by theater is extremely important, because we're not just dealing with normal times, we're dealing with COVID times, and all of the problems that people experience get amplified. And so having that relationship with the community, I think, is really important.
Any message for people that are watching today?
Yeah, the big ask that I'm asking from people right now is, I want to know where people think about all of the different issues. So the big ask that I have is please visit my website at www.natepike.ca. You can sign up for updates there. I'm putting my platform up there in just a little bit. I'm also putting my resume up there. And one of the other big things, which I should totally mention, or my team is going to kill me, is when I say that I'm campaigning on transparency, that's not just lip service. I want to do the work. So one of the things that I'm doing with my campaign is I'm disclosing any and all donations that I receive as I receive them. Right now, the way that the law works is that you do have to disclose all of your donations, but you don't have to do it till after the vote's done. And I think that's really problematic, especially when we're talking about slates and especially when we're talking about teams of candidates working together across the city. People need to know who's supporting you. They need to know whether or not you're being backed by large organizations. And so that's one of the reasons why all of my donations are available on my website. You can see the names, the amounts, the dates, everything. And I think that the other big message, other than please visit my website, would be if you come across a candidate in the municipal election, whether it be for councillor or mayor, and even if you're watching and you're not in Ward 3, I would strongly encourage you to ask that candidate if they're disclosing their donations, and if they aren't, why. Because as long as we don't have transparency, we're just going to have to deal with a continued distrust in government and a continued distrust in our elected officials. And that's not how we move forward.
What is the financial rule in the municipal election? What is the maximum donation you can get?
The maximum donation any one person can give to one candidate is $5,000. But if I wanted to, if I had the money, which I don't, but if I wanted to, I could pick 10 candidates, 11 candidates, whatever number, across the city, and I could give them each that amount.
How much can you receive as a candidate? Is there a limit for that?
There's a limit for an individual spend, how much each individual person can spend on their campaign. But in regards to how much you receive, I don't believe there is a limit, but now I'm going to have to double check that. I'm pretty confident I'm not going to get anywhere near any limits that exist.
Because I know provincially NDP did put some limits when they came into power last time in 2015, but municipally, I don't know if that's the case in city elections.
I don't believe there is I don't know if there's a spend limit for councillor. I do know that one of the big things that's going to be influencing this election is the third party advertisers, the PACs, because the spending and the donation rules around them are incredibly vague. And so we're starting to see, I mean, I've already been contacted by multiple PACs who have tried to sway my opinion on things. And I'm torn on it because on one hand, I can appreciate that organizations who want to advocate for a specific issue should be able to advocate for that specific issue. But at the same time, I get real uncomfortable when people who don't even live in the wards that they're trying to influence are trying to influence the outcome of those elections. I don't know that's necessarily healthy for our democracy. And for people who want to know what my policy stuffs are that I've put out so far, because I have been aggressively pursuing a lot of that, follow me on social media. I'm on all of the things except for TikTok. I'm too old for TikTok, I think.
I've tried Twitter. I couldn't even do Twitter, to be honest, Nate. I tried Twitter. I couldn't do Twitter. I tried Instagram. I don't know. I can't do Instagram either. I tried TikTok. I only have maybe 2 videos. I don't know. I'm getting old too.
My Twitter game is strong. I am confident in my Twitter game. I am also entirely capable of recognizing that my TikTok game is not strong.
So what's your Twitter handle and what is your Facebook page and Instagram if you're using it?
At Nate Pike.
Okay, perfect. So I'll put that in the caption and I'll put that in the video as well. So anyone and everyone who wants to know more about Nate, please follow him on social media at Nate Pike. You can go to his website, www.natepike.ca. And thank you so much once again, Nate, and I wish you the best.
Thank you, Roop. You as well.